I'll usually use like a Fab Filter EQ. I'll use it to filter out various frequencies at different moments in the song. Sometimes it's super subtle, like not necessarily going for a really affected sound. I might be filtering out some of the low end and some of the high end in the verse, and you don't really know it's not there until you hit the chorus and the filters go away and the chorus just is like, wah!
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Today's episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is sponsored by Roswell Pro Audio, maker of handcrafted microphones in California. Inspired design and impeccable attention to detail will help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful line of microphones at roswellproaudio.com. Sending your music to be mastered can be scary, but sending your music to a total stranger for mastering can be really scary. Chris Graham is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer with thousands of credits and knows how to make your record sound fantastic. But more importantly, he understands that there is one person that really knows what a great record sounds like, and that's you, rock stars. So if you're thinking about hiring professional mastering, but not sure if it's right for you, go to chrisgrahammastering.com and get a free sample mastering of your song. Go find out just how great your record can sound at chrisgrahammastering.com. Just click the link included in the show notes. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Canadian-born producer and songwriter Karen Kosowski. She has had multiple chart-topping productions, crossing over from total ear-catching pop to party-driving country music. Karen has recently had an American Top 40 hit called Somebody to Love Me with Tyron, and in Canada, multiple hits for the artist Alee, the number 4 Billboard AC hit, It Won't Be Christmas, which sounded really cool, by the way.
Thank you.
And the top 20 AC and top 30 HotAC hit, Worst Enemy. And for Michelle Treacy, am I pronouncing her name right? Okay, great. The top 30 HotAC hit, Colors. In country music, Karen produced the top 20 hit, Motel Flamingo.
Top 10 now.
Oh, top 10. Wow, awesome. Nicely
As of
done.
last week.
Awesome. For Madeline Merlo.
Madeline Merlo, yes.
Oh, yeah. Madeline Merlo. Nice. And co-wrote Alee's Billboard top 40 hit, Only the Strong Survive. And in 2015, she wrote and produced the music for Pan Am Games, medal ceremonies, and she has numerous TV and film placements on television networks such as HBO Canada, CBS, FX Network, Lifetime Network, Nick Teen, Space, and the CW, and in feature films like the award-winning thriller The Scare House and Wango Films, I like that, it's Zwango Zitango, Wango Films action movie 88, starring Christopher Lloyd, for which she was nominated in the category of Achievement in Music, Best Original Song in the 2016 Canadian Screen Awards. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Currently based here in Nashville, Tennessee, we're actually joining you from her beautiful studio on Berry Hill. What's the name of your studio?
The HotAC.
The HotAC. Ah, you really are a Star Trek fan.
I am.
Oh, that's cool. We got to talk about that. You're working on a selection of country and pop projects, including producing a new album for Alee, which maybe is out right about now, too. I don't know.
So it's going to be released in 2 volumes, and the first volume is coming out on October 6th.
Cool. All right, so please welcome Karen Kosowski to Recording Studio Rockstars. Karen, my lady, are you ready to rock?
Always.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We recently had your friend Dana on the show, and it's wonderful for you to be here as the second female producer on the show.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. How did you start out in recording music? How did you get to be here doing this?
Well, I mean, I started out like a lot of kids. You know, your parents put you in music lessons as a kid. And so I did, you know, piano lessons and all the bands in school and stuff like that. And I was growing up in suburban Winnipeg, so I was playing classical piano, but I was listening to Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston and New Kids on the Block and Tiffany. And I guess I was like 12 or 13. I was starting to try to write some of my own stuff. But, you know, with those kind of influences, it was all kind of coming out like a jumble of half Wilson Phillips, half classically influenced Yanni or something. It was
nice.
It was
bringing
kind of,
Yanni onto the podcast. I like it.
I mean, I remember borrowing a sound module from my junior high school for the summer, and I was really excited that I got to borrow this Yamaha sound module, and it had the sound of ocean waves as one of the patches, and I actually made a little cassette tape of this song that I was writing at the time, and I used the ocean waves sample at the beginning and the end, and oh my God, it was really cheesy.
And then who is it that I'm thinking? Who did Skater Boy?
Avril Lavigne.
Avril Lavigne, right? She's Canadian.
Yes, she
So
is.
was that sort of your growing up time there, or
No, that was a little after my time.
after your time? All right, yeah, right.
Yeah, but she's awesome.
Oh, right. That was only like 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, but thank you.
That would make you the youngest producer on the show as well.
Thanks. Yeah, like I was kind of doing that for a while, and then when it wasn't like till the 10th grade when I was in high school, and a lot of the older kids that I was hanging out with, because I was doing the high school musical and I was the rehearsal pianist. And every day after rehearsals, they would play this Sarah McLachlan song over the speakers in the theater. The other high school kids, the older ones, they'd like pop the CD into the player and they'd be playing this song. And I'd be like, what is that? You know, and it was just her. It was just a piano vocal. It was actually the hidden track off of Fumbling Towards Ecstasy, which was like just out at that time. And I'd never heard anything like that. And it kind of was a watershed moment for me where suddenly I heard like a female singer-songwriter. And in general, singer-songwriter music just sort of started to explode around that time. And, you know, that was the time of Lilith Fair.
Right.
I got hooked on Tori Amos because I'm like, wow, she's a badass piano player. She's really rocking it. And as a piano player myself, I was like, I don't want to do that.
Did you get to record Tori?
Record Tori?
Yeah. Have you had a chance to record her?
Oh, no, man. That would be, I think I would probably turn into a statue of nervousness if I ever had that opportunity. Oh my God.
I was very lucky to actually record her at my Bonnaroo Hay Bale studio one year.
Wow.
And it was a trip because I wasn't a super fan. So I wasn't, petrified as she came in.
Okay.
I was just, happy to have her in the studio. But she came in, I knew she was a big deal,
Yeah.
And she came in and she didn't shake my hand before because she had just powdered her hands.
Oh.
Which might have actually been a really smart way to manage the fact that everybody's using a porta potty at Bonnaroo. But
True.
I interpreted it as the truth. And like maybe she like powdered her hands before she did the piano.
Wow.
And she played and sang. And she also did this other remarkable thing. She would finish the song, and something that I've tried to teach some kids when I'm recording them, whether they're doing poetry or music, is like the end of the song should have, like, you're not done until after the song's even done, And she would finish, and then she would take her hands and she'd like lift them up, and then they'd go off to the sides. Like she's almost like, I guess you can't see it on a podcast. How would you describe that? It's like a angel's wings descending or
it's
something.
It's like a visual cue.
Yeah.
I feel like I actually learned that. My piano teacher, when I was, a kid, would teach me to do that when I was performing in recitals.
Maybe it's
and stuff.
a Canadian thing.
Nah. I mean, like, I think it's like a cool visual cue where it's like the moment, it's like framing your portrait.
Right.
And you play your piece and then you're still lingering. It's like the song is still lingering in the air until you like
release
are done.
Everybody.
And you release it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really cool detail. And I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. It's like,
Well, she's heavy. I mean,
like, I better not say anything until she's done with the hand thing. And then we're really done,
Now you may breathe.
Yeah. All right. So sorry. So Tori Amos, Lilith Fair.
Yeah. Like, I mean, at that time there was.
Oh, we forgot to turn off phones, but here we go. Rock stars, we're going to leave that in because that's legit. And it's a reminder, turn off your phones during the recording session. It's my fault, though.
Yeah, no, totally my fault. I'm sorry. Yeah, there was like this big explosion of singer-songwriter music at that time. And before that, I'd been listening to a lot of artists who were like some of the most iconic pop artists. But there wasn't as big a focus on people writing their own music, you know? And for me, I was seeing all this happening. And to be honest, I had no context in terms of how unusual it was to see women doing that too. So to me, that didn't actually enter into my consciousness at that moment. It was just more, oh, wow, there's all these singer-songwriters and they're going out and they're playing their songs. And I guess that's what I should be doing. You know, I guess I should write these songs and go out and perform them myself.
This is like end of 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that was Lilith Fair. And so you feel like it was an introduction to the idea of women writing their own songs that they're performing as well.
I think for me, especially, it was an introduction to like, well, this is my path. Like I should be an artist, which I was totally wrong.
I don't know why, but the first thing that popped into my head, which is really like 10 years prior to that or more, was Cyndi Lauper doing Girls Just Want to Have Fun, because there was a story around that too where, you know, this is a time when she was doing music, but it's like you're presented with a song. Well, here's a song, here's a song.
Yeah.
And somebody presented her that song and she was like, that's the most ridiculous song I've ever heard. That's absurd. You know?
Really? And
that's why they did it.
Nice.
It was like a slap in the face. It was just like, they're sort of poking fun at the whole concept. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just being transparent. It popped into my head, so I'm sharing it.
No, that's great. I
have no idea whether there's really a connection between that and what you're talking about.
But I think there is, like, because there was just so much of the music I had been listening to up to that point was like that. And the focus was on the performer as a performer.
Right.
And then, so for me, I mean, you know, again, I was really isolated. I was in suburban Winnipeg. I didn't know what I should be doing. I was doing jazz bands in school. I was doing the wind ensemble. I was involved with the musical theater. I was in the jazz choir. Like I was just trying to do anything I could that had to do with music. And organically, it sort of worked out. Like I was trying to write songs and then I fell in love with all these singer-songwriter oriented artists. And so then I started thinking that that's what I should do. So that's basically when I started really hardcore pursuing writing music and performing it. And as a byproduct of that, I started producing my own recording and producing my own records, because I'm not really sure actually why. It was like I was very into the do-it-yourself kind of thing, and I didn't have any money to go into a studio and hire people. So, you know, I started out like renting stuff from the local music store. I'd rent like an ADAT, and I'd go to like, and I'd rent a couple mics, and you know, I'd go out to the coffee house where I had a gig that night and I'd record that show and I released it on a cassette tape, and that was my first record.
That's awesome.
You know, like
cassette culture. I love that. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I remember dubbing cassette tapes to sell, you know, and I designed my own cover art, and it was very much like, I just kind of was hands-on with everything just because that's all I really knew. And I think part of it was just, you know, being a suburban kid growing up. And part of it was I didn't know to reach out. I had no idea that, you know, it was partly my fault, I think, that I didn't realize that there was a music scene I could reach out to in Winnipeg.
Well, it reminds me too, because similar for me, initially, if I wanted to record something, you know, you needed to go into somebody's studio to record it, or you had to rent ADATs. You know, I did that too. We found a guy, wow, you can rent ADATs and we can do a session here and set it up in our house.
Yeah.
And that really is so different from now, where it's like, you know, you get a hold of a laptop or a computer and you sort of have a built-in studio. You might need a couple of pieces of, a couple items to go with it, but you could start recording stuff right away.
Yeah. And that was about the time, like around the same time I started recording with my very first PC in my kitchen in Winnipeg, in this like upstairs apartment from my grandmother.
The kitchen, we're all studios.
The kitchen, seriously, like my cats, I had a couple cats at the time and they kind of were wandering around, and we were running mic cables from the kitchen into the next room. And I had like one of the very first versions of Fruity Loops, and I was making beats with that. And I was using Sonic Foundry, Vegas, and SoundForge, and like just starting to kind of get into like tracking that way and trying out stuff and having absolutely no idea what I was doing, but just like really liking exploring it, you know, and a little drum machine. And so I started like that. I was just very do it yourself. And the thing for me, I guess, is that I listened to so many things and got into so many things. I went through different stages. I was like super heavy into Radiohead for a while. I blew out my car speakers listening to Portishead, like, Soundgarden. I got heavily into Keane when I saw another, really a band, I love UK bands. And there's this UK band with like strong keyboard parts. And I was like, yeah. So every record that I made for myself sounded like a completely different artist. Like I was going through so many different phases, and I did that for a really long time. And then I started to realize that like I was learning production and writing through this whole career. And what I realized is what I didn't like was the solo career. I love the epiphany for me was realizing that I loved the writing and the production side, but not being a solo artist.
Right. Because you were getting up on stage and playing shows.
I was
were you
touring.
trying to book shows out of town and tour and stuff and all that?
I did a bunch of tours. It was me driving around in my Dodge Neon with my keyboard and my boxes of CDs in the back.
Nice.
I toured in Northeast US a bunch and New York, Boston, and, really kind of like the singer-songwriter thing that you would do at that time.
Yeah. So there's a sort of a New England singer-songwriter circuit too, right?
Yes. I was trying to tap into that, but I was a little too pop, like it never was the right thing. But in the process of doing that, I was kind of learning, making my own records, making a ton of mistakes, kind of learning a bunch of stuff on doing it myself, teaching myself kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, cool. So you sort of transitioned to more production, and what's the sort of fast track from that to landing in Nashville here?
Well, when I fast tracked into full-time production, it kind of took off. It was like the universe going, yes, do this. And so I spent a few years in Toronto where I was living, doing that for various artists and really kind of getting co-writing skills. Because when I was an artist myself, I'd never co-wrote. So I was like building up my co-writing, producing records for people. Honestly, Nashville, I'm such a recent transplant. It's only this year, and it's just something I knew I wanted to try to access more of the writing that's happening down here. Canada, we have amazing artists, but it's really difficult for Canadian artists to get heard outside of Canada.
Right.
Like I come down here and no one knows anyone that whereas if something happens in the States, it's international. It's
Right.
internationally known. So
Except for my band.
It's a recognized fact that the American music scene is just a juggernaut across the world.
Juggernaut.
Yeah. So, it's a natural thing to want to, see about getting involved with that. So much of the music I love is coming out of here. And I've come down to LA and Nashville on various writing trips and loved the music that came out of those trips. So, coming down here and being a recent transplant was the next step, really.
Well, we have a mutual friend in Dave Kalmusky, who's also been on the podcast. Was Dave somebody that you knew from up in Canada before, or are you guys recently meeting down here?
Yeah, we met down here. But he's like the Canadian embassy.
I actually just ran into him right out front as I was parking. I was like, Dave, of course you're here.
Yeah,
you're how I met Karen. He's
like a linchpin of the Canadian scene here. Everyone kind of revolves around Kalmusky.
Right, indeed.
Yeah.
So rock stars, I met Karen at Summer NAMM this summer over at Addiction Studios, Dave Kalmusky's studio with Jonathan Cain. But anyway, that's just a little backstory to it. So we're going to get into production, but let's talk about, again, your move here. So one of the things that we talk about on the show too is like, imagine yourself moving to a new place. You did move to a new place. Mm-hmm. You found this wonderful room in Berry Hill, great location, and you converted it into your studio. Is this the space? Do you have ISO booths that are attached to this anywhere too? Or is it like you went sort of for a big single room space that's control room / recording space?
Yeah. Right now, this is the vibe. This is the one room. I definitely have always kind of worked that way. I had studios up in Toronto before. And again, it was like usually using the one room, sometimes using an ISO booth. But I feel like the nature of what I do a lot, which is a lot of writing and then producing those songs that come out of that, it's sort of in that kind of new school approach, which is like, a lot of it happens just in the room at the time. You know, you may go and overdub stuff after the fact, you may add stuff on, but it's very much the initial creation. And you're already making a record the day you're writing the song.
Well, majority of our listeners are home studio owners. So I think that there's a lot of similarity between what you're doing here and a home studio. The only difference might be that for some people, that one room is a lot smaller, and this one is, you know, you got enough room to set up 2 drum sets in here if you want to, you know. We might have to move the dining room table. Yeah. But I guess this looks like a converted garage space turned into a studio. I
like it that there's a living space upstairs, but that this is the studio down here. Yeah. And what I've always loved is how people can come in here and feel relaxed, you know?
Yeah, it's totally relaxing. That's what I said. I was like, ooh, it smells good in here.
Yeah. And, you know, we don't have, I mean, like a lot of people now that are writing and producing out of their own spaces, you don't have the constraints of, you know, being on the clock.
Right.
You know, we can create as long as we want. We're not running into budgetary concerns. We're not thinking about our wallets. It's just, you know, okay, we're here. We're going to work as long as we want. We're going to go take a break. We're going to come back, you know. I mean, that's just, it's becoming more and more common. There's beautiful studios, and I love when I get a chance to work out of them. But, you know, these days, a lot of stuff is happening this way too.
Yeah.
And it's just becoming kind of the norm.
Can you talk about the space itself and what it meant to move in here? How did you decide where to put things? What did you decide to do about treatment of the walls or ceiling or anything?
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have to feel like you need to sound like an expert about it. I mean, I think everybody's just moving into a space. What should I do? You know, where should I put my speakers?
I definitely found the spot that seemed the deadest to do vocals, and I definitely turn off all the power to anything that makes noise when when I'm tracking. You know, I feel like I've sort of figured out what's working the best right now. In terms of this being a permanent space for me for 10 years, I'm not sure that's the case. So I haven't gone to the extent of like fully treating the walls, and it's not causing problems for me right now. I've definitely had to make some adjustments. Like I just mixed Emily's entire record here. And
cool.
This room, the bass kind of gets out of control when I play stuff on speakers. So it was my first time ever mixing a record on mixing headphones, which was just psychologically strange at first. But I went down to Vintage King, and they were super great, and they recommended these great headphones that they said, people are having really good results with. So
what'd you end up using?
They're Shure SRH 1840.
Nice.
And they're open backed. They seemed really faithful, and everything I did really translated. So I'd be mixing it, and then I would listen on speakers and go, oh, wow, this room has so much bass. And then I'd go into my car and hear that. And I mean, I like bass anyway, so I tend to mix it kind of loud. But I found that it did work, which was a revelation for me. Because, I mean, people are going into hotel rooms with these and tour buses, and they're actually mixing on headphones like this now, which is, again, something I've never done before, but it worked.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the rock stars listening are mixing on headphones probably, or combination. So that's a very relevant thing to people. And I know there are some tools out there. Rev 33 is a little unit I've got that does a cool thing where you can plug your headphones through it, and it helps tighten up the sound. I'll have to think of some of the ones, but they're like, plugins that will help try and give you a flat response in your headphones if you want. Although I kind of like just learning what the headphones sound like and going with that too,
I mean, ultimately, I feel like I've never had a pristine environment. Any of the studios, any of the rooms that I've ever had set up over the years, I've never had a perfect listening environment.
Yeah.
There's always been problems with it, but it's what you're used to.
Right.
Like my place in Toronto, I was in for 15 years. I had a big, huge window, a big, huge glass window. And I just knew how my speakers sounded in that room. I had a set of Dynaudios that I've used for forever. And I knew what the room sounded like. I knew what the AC unit sounded like. I knew what the fridge sounded like. I knew everything. So you get used to listening to other records in that room, and you get used to your own mixes, and you kind of you adjust. It's what you're comfortable with. For me, I was nervous mixing this record because I was so new to this space. And I hadn't been in this space.
Are those the Atom A7s?
The Atom A7Xs, yeah, cool. Which I love. I love the detail in them, but it was the room that I was struggling with. So, you
just get used to it. You start working around it. I know there's a new plugin too that I haven't checked out yet, but we talked about on the show with Gabri Waddell. He has soundways.com, and they have a plugin called Reveal that is supposed to make it so that you can tell what's going on with the low end much more easily. So again, I'm not going into it too much, just saying it's kind of cool that there are some tools out there that can help ease that process of mixing in headphones and just having more ways to get comfortable with it. But in the end, I guess you just take it to a few places and listen. You, like you say, you just teach yourself.
I mean, I went down the street. Cal Muskie was awesome. I went down the street to Addiction and listened to some stuff in his room on his Genelex, and I was like,
his Megas.
I was so scared the first couple times I brought in mixes, and he was so kind and was just like, yeah, come on in anytime, take a listen. And so I put the mixes up. I'm like, hey, it's not bad.
Nicely done.
I was like, okay, phew, okay, next mix.
That's cool. Well, all right. So we like to ask guests on the show to share with us an inspirational quote to get us kind of excited about hitting the studio. Is there anything you want to share with the rock stars, get them psyched up?
Sure. I wouldn't say that this is like a famous quote, but it's something someone said to me once. I was in LA and I was doing a bunch of writing sessions, and another producer that I was having a beer with one day said to me, you know, a song has to do one of two things. It has to elicit one of two responses from your listener. It's got to either be, fuck yeah, or that's me. And if you can get either one of those responses from your listener, and I feel like it's applicable to writing or production, then you've succeeded, because that song is going to mean something to that person. It's going to get an emotional reaction, and you have a better chance of them wanting to hear it again.
That's interesting. Yeah. Those are both good points. So the fuck yeah is the one that says, like, you hear it and you're like, it's almost like you might feel that the song is expressing just the kind of party you want to have, or it's expressing the rebellion that you're thinking needs to happen. So you want to get behind it or adopt it. And then the that's me is like when you just broke up in a relationship and every lyric somehow speaks directly to your broken heart.
Yeah.
You know, potentially,
you
or
see yourself in that song, and it has to become a fabric of your life somehow, you know?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, those are cool. I like that.
Yeah, I thought so.
Which ones do you get to produce more often? The fuck yeahs or the that's me's?
Well, I don't know if that's for me to say. I mean,
good point. It's up to the listener.
Yeah, it's gonna be different for every listener. I hope that it's one of those, definitely.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I mean, like flipping through some of your productions, there is the Madeline Merlo Motel Flamingo. It definitely seems like a fuck yeah song. You know what I mean?
Great.
It's like a party country track where you're like, oh, cool, man, awesome, yeah, let's go tear it up.
Unless you've been to a sketchy motel and then you're like, ooh, that's me.
Ooh, that's me. Yeah. No, but that was pretty fun, and I appreciate that you are doing a lot of production where you know, I heard a lot of tracks where the pop quality in it is just awesome, and the sonics of it, I'm like, it totally turned me on. I'm like, yes, awesome, you know, because I don't always get to hear that. You know, I live in Nashville, so there's pop, but you know, there's a lot of country. There's a lot of pop that might be a little bit more, I don't know, ambient pop or something like that. Whereas I felt like yours was more, you know, just like the kick and snares, like, boom, you know, and the bass is thumping, and it made me, you know, it's more party tracks, which I thought was cool.
Oh, cool.
And then I felt like I was hearing you transition that into like the Madeline Merlo track going into country, but you're bringing the party, and you know, you're kind of, you have an understanding and appreciation for what it means to have a chorus drop and be in your face, you know, and have some hooks.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about all that stuff, but before we even get to those detailed questions, how about sharing with us a story of an important failure, something that became a real learning experience for you?
Okay.
Other than agreeing to do this podcast with me.
For me, I would say that There was this one experience that really taught me that I really have to trust my instincts as a producer. This was early on, and I was producing a record for an artist, and they really wanted to use their live band. And it was very based in sentimentality and, friendships. And at the time, I was like, I kind of knew it might not be the right decision, but the artist felt very strongly about it. And part of your job as a producer is also to make them happy. And you want the artist to be inspired and pumped up. And so we went ahead and we made the record using the live band. And then after the fact, I was like, I ended up, replacing a couple things and just feeling like we made a cool record, but I didn't feel like it was the record we could have made. And I didn't feel like it was as commercially successful as it could have been. I feel like it definitely made me realize that I should have trusted my first instinct in the beginning.
What's the first instrument that comes to mind when you think of the difference between a live band that is, not commercial sounding enough versus producing for some reason, I'm assuming that you meant the difference between a live band and kind of programming it a little bit more. Maybe that's not true. Maybe you just meant a different band.
Yeah. Or like bringing in really experienced session players or specific players that would get that performance that I was hearing it could have,
Yeah.
As opposed to like, these are like, I did a bunch of pre-pro with the band, we went and tried to work out parts, but it's different, it's different. It was very much like documentary filmmaking.
Right. Interesting.
So I don't think there's one instrument that stands out to me. I mean, at first I was as you were asking me that, I was thinking, well, rhythm section.
Right.
Like ultimately, yes, drums.
Drum and bass
Drums,
are like
bass.
the backbone of a pop track.
Yeah.
Typically.
Definitely the groove, like that's the backbone. But everything else is important.
Yeah, but let's keep breaking it down for a sec. So the difference between either great players and players that might have great intentions, but just not really have the skill set yet would be things like that, right? So groove, having the right pocket, also writing simple and powerful parts. I think a first thing you'd notice with bringing in the wrong players is, they're putting too many fills in the wrong places, or they don't really, the chorus one, it's like, why is the kick snare pattern different than it is in chorus two?
Right.
That kind of stuff,
A good
Is it
player
different because it should be different, or is it different because you can't remember and figure out which part it's going to be,
Yeah.
But it's tonal consistency, right?
Tonal
that's one of the things
consistency.
that's really nice about program drums that you do get is it's like every kick is the same. It's got the same characteristic, which some people might say is some people don't like that. But, the nice thing about that is you've got a boom, and it's like always right where it needs to be.
It's solid.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and these days there's also so much layering and so much samples that you layer and so much editing. I mean, I do a lot of stuff that's very programmed now.
Yeah.
But I do also, like, especially with country stuff, if I'm producing a country track, my favorite thing is to bring in also live players after I've already built up, a programmed track.
Right. So the program track gives you like the perfect roadmap for
Exactly.
what the song needs to be.
It achieves pre-production. It sets a direction. And a lot of that stuff, some of it I've put in just as a sketch that someone's going to come in and like I'm not a super strong guitar player. I play some guitar, but like I'm not a guitar session player, especially not country. So, I'll bring in someone who's going to be amazing for that. But in terms of like drums and stuff, like I may be blending in. I may keep some of that stuff and then have the live player play their ideas on that and get like something that's going to blend with the two. I love that,
So let's talk about that. What are some of the considerations that tend to have to be addressed when you're blending program drums with live drums? Things that come to mind for me are you can't really have two kick drums landing where the kick drum lands, or maybe you can, I don't know.
Timing. You have to decide. There's always going to be some element of editing in terms of timing and making sure that things are lining up the way that they should. A lot of, you don't want the kick drums flamming. If you've got two kick drums, does one have a lot more attack? Is one more sub? Are you using that mainly to just reinforce and give the punch?
Like somebody has to be kind of in the foreground and somebody's in the background.
Or just different frequency spectrums,
right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's something that I feel like I stumbled on by accident in the learning process, was trying to have everybody have low end. And then when you listen in the end, you're like, you realize that you just end up with a bunch of kick drums that some are bigger than others and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just because one's consistent and one is organic,
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. All right. Well, so what was your learning experience from all that? Was that just to start bringing in great players and try and trust your instinct?
Just trust my instincts. And I think that applies to everything, It was just one of those things where I was like, yeah, I think I had the right instinct to begin with, and I didn't trust myself, and I wish I did. So next time I'm going to stand up for that more,
Nice. All right. Well, so let's jump into some questions.
Sure.
On Try On Somebody to Love Me, there is definitely like an in-your-face program sound going on. There's elements that remind me of a lot of modern production. It was fun to hear it. It's like,
cool, thanks.
There's something about the kick and the snare and the bass landing, and it has that pumping quality that gives it almost like a, EDM meets pop music crossover. What are some things that make that happen in a production like that, in a mix like that? And I don't know whether you mixed it as well or not, but
I didn't mix that one, but for me, as I was producing it, that one, it's interesting that you asked this question about that particular song, because I was very aware of wanting to preserve space in the production so that it would pump like that.
Right.
I wanted there to, I'm often a habit of like throwing the kitchen sink at something in terms of like lots of layers and lots of different things. But in this one specifically, I really wanted the synth chords, and I really wanted the rhythmic elements to punch like that. I wanted it to just grab you in the face. So if I had put like, a big pad through the whole thing, it would have just diminished that. It would have just blurred it all together. So I was very into preserving space around the parts, really try to make sure that there was lots of room for things to breathe, so that the mix could do that, so that the mixer could then, make those parts just jump out in those spots. And then the vocal also has space. Nothing's competing with that. It was very much my plan from the beginning on that particular track. So I love that you asked that.
Well, so if you did want to have a pad, would you write sort of a ducking, pumping sound into the pad as part of your production?
Maybe, yeah. Or just really try to make sure that it's not, that the frequency range on it isn't interfering with the things that are needing to punch,
Right.
Or if I am mixing it, it's also a consideration, where am I panning it?
Right.
How far in the background is it? How thick is it? Which again takes me back to the frequency range, where it's like, yeah, I don't want it in the way of any of those things. Those things need their freedom to poke out in all those good ways. And if there's some kind of low bass synth that's just like blurring the whole thing, you're not going to hear that kick. That kick is just not going to punch like that.
And that's the hard thing to do when you've got that pumping low end. That, God, I just think of so many tracks. I can't name drop them all, but when you've got that and it sounds like the bass is gigantic, but it still all works together.
Yeah.
And it's punchy. It's like, how do you do that?
Well, the side chaining. Like if you do have like a really sustained bass sound, then definitely, getting the right kind of pumping, undulating side chain action is the trick, right? So that you got your kick, when your kick comes in, it's just punching a hole right through everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so for somebody who's listening who doesn't quite know what that is, do you think you can kind of basically explain what it is to have, what side chaining is? And, do you pick one kick and say, this is the kick that punches and I'm going to work around that? Is there one that's almost like a benchmark that you're working with?
It depends. I've done all kinds of things to sidechain stuff, everything from using one of my kick drums. So basically, to explain, it's like having one element in your arrangement. When that element happens, the other things duck out of the way.
Right.
It's like a window.
And it almost makes it sound like that one thing is louder.
Yeah.
It makes everything sound louder.
But it's not really something that, if you're just listening to it, sometimes you don't perceive it that way. You just, I hear the kick drum. Like you're not thinking. If it wasn't sidechained, you wouldn't feel the rhythmic pulse the way that you do.
Right.
For me, when I'm when I'm setting up a sidechain, it depends on what I want the response of the other instruments to be like. If I want it to be almost imperceptible, then I might use the actual kick drum, or I might even use the kick drum, but then I might put like a transient designer on it, like on a separate track that you're not hearing, but that's the trigger. And I might cut down the sustain of it so that it's a shorter release, so that the other instruments come back in quicker.
And do you use just basic compressors or limiters on the other tracks and trigger the limiting, or do you use special plugins that give you that kind of pumping quality?
I go back and forth with some of the ones that I use. Lately, I feel like I've been using HComp a lot for sidechaining. I like how it responds. I've even used like Renaissance compressor a lot. And there's actually, if you're just doing like a straight kind of very static rhythmic sidechain, there's some really cool plugins. There's one called Volume Shaper.
Yeah, that's the one that
in the Shaper box.
Matthew
suite.
Weiss shared that one on the podcast in the past, and I played around with it. And it's so cool.
It's so cool because you can draw exactly the way you want, and then you don't need a trigger either. It's pumping for you. So you have ultimate control over the shape of the pumping. And I've also used it as to turn like a synth part into something that sounds as more arpeggiated, like a chordal, a pumping eighth note part or a 16th note part, by using it kind of in the reverse, where it's shaping the envelope on the synth part to have a shorter decay. And so the synth part itself is just a pad, but then when you throw the volume shaper on it and you make your adjustments, it sounds like bop, 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 bop.
Right, it's like you're adding a tremolo
exactly.
as a plugin.
Or yeah, it's really cool.
Cool.
Such a cool plugin.
And then did you ever get into making the sounds pump by actually drawing automation too? Was that a path that you went down, or is that
Not
just like
much.
quickly, just like a big fat waste of time to try it that way?
It's very time consuming. I can't say, I don't think I've ever spent a lot of time doing that.
Okay, cool. But I like that you said HComp and Renaissance compressor is two, easy go-to compressors.
Those work well. Yeah.
And then also that you said that the trigger, instead of like the full shape of the kick drum, in order to gain more control, use like a transient designer or something. So I think that in that case, you maybe have the transient. If you listen to that track that has the kick drum and the transient designer on it, it might just sound like bip, not sound like a kick drum anymore, right?
Or I've also used just like electric piano patch and played in exactly the length of note I wanted and adjusted that with MIDI and then used that as my sidechain trigger.
Oh man, you're ninja.
Well, it's just trial and error.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, so let's talk about what you use now that we're talking about tools.
Sure.
One of the first things I noticed is you've got a cool studio. You've actually got 3 screens set up, and you did not have Pro Tools open. You had Logic Pro.
Yeah.
But I assume maybe you probably know your way around all these DAWs.
Yeah. I feel like for me, I mean, the main 2 that I use are Logic and Pro Tools. But for me, I started on Logic like 15 years ago. And so it's definitely my quickest language. Plus, I feel like the two programs still have different qualities to them. Like Logic is very much a great sequencing workhorse. That's where its background came from. It was a sequencer. Whereas Pro Tools is still like its background was like recording to tape.
Do you remember that? Were you recording at the time where it was like so awesome if you could figure out how to have Logic and Pro Tools open at the same time and synced? That was like a big deal
thankfully,
back in the day.
No, I mean, I did more like rewiring of Reason to Logic, but not like using the 2, because for me, I just would do audio work in Logic as well. That was my introduction to Logic. So much of what I do as a writer producer when I'm working with artists, we're building stuff in the writing session, but a lot of it is in the box. I do so much stuff in the box that for me, Logic makes so much sense. It's logical.
Right. Well, I really like Logic in terms of how quick and easy it is to just sort of pull up an instrument or a sound and be recording something. And it seems to have a great workflow for composing and being a composer.
Definitely.
It's what we use. I was telling you about the studio at the Nashville's downtown library. There's this studio there called Studio NPL, and it's a free teen center where kids can go after school and have free access to studios. So kids, if you're listening and you want to come to Nashville, you can go to the downtown library for free studio access. But they have awesome. Logic. That's what they use. And they have some Pro Tools there, but everything just, nobody ever even opens Pro Tools. They just open Logic and use it, and kids dig it. So what are some other things about Logic that really are cool features that you like?
Well, one of the things I love about it are the take folders. And it was interesting because on this last record I did with Alee, we ended up tracking some of her final vocals in Pro Tools over at Addiction. And I thought for sure I was going to comp and edit the vocals in Pro Tools because I love how solid it feels for editing audio. I always have. I always felt like that was one of Logic's weaker features. But then when I went to actually start editing, I found myself feeling like I was frustrated with how slow I felt, because I feel like Logic has made some great strides in the last few years with the take folder feature in terms of auditioning different takes and being able to, as you're comping, swipe between stuff, that I was really missing that. So I actually went and consolidated all her takes and I brought them into Logic, and I ended up comping and editing them in Logic.
Well, that's cool. And so is there, do you want to explain, if it's possible, the process of bringing a series of takes in Pro Tools into converting them to a series of takes in Logic? That might be a cool insight for everybody.
Yeah, it's basically like I went in with these vocals. We had a lot of pieces all over the place in the timeline. So I went through and just sort of tidied up with broad strokes any spots that were overlapping. And then I went and consolidated all the files so that they were all starting at 0. And then literally just like went into the audio files folder of that session and dragged those all into my session in Logic.
Right. So now in Logic in your session, they're all, like if you zipped over the window on the right and you could see all the audio tracks, you might find them in there, but they're not in Logic on a track yet, right?
Right. So then I would drag those audio files from my Finder window into the Arrange window of Logic and tell it to create new tracks. But then it puts each one on its own individual track.
Okay.
So then I would highlight all those tracks that it just made, or all the actual files in the Arrange window, all the regions, and I would tell it to create take folder.
Ooh, cool. So you can just do that in one move. I don't even know if you can do that in Pro Tools.
I don't know. Because Pro Tools has the playlist feature.
Yeah, I don't think you can drag. I don't think you can. If you can, I don't know about it yet.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could just take a stack of 20 tracks and
make
turn them into 20 takes.
I don't
You could do it more painstakingly, one at a time or something like that.
Probably, yeah.
Cool.
So it is a cool feature. And then you just have it like the drop down take folder, and I'm gesturing with my hands, but no one can see. But yeah, it just made it really easy, you know?
All right, let me ask you a couple of questions about using Logic that I get stumped by when I'm in there. If I was zoomed in close and I was looking at a space, there was an edit point in a comped vocal and I needed to go quickly to the next edit point, what key would I use to jump forward? These are the things that I know how to do in Pro Tools.
Yeah, you're talking like a tab to transient kind of feature?
Yeah, like tab how do you do tab?
I'm the wrong person to ask for that because I actually don't use that feature. I never have. I know that everyone uses it, but for some reason, in my own weird little way, I just never ended up doing that.
Or in Pro Tools, if I selected a region, I could use the left and right arrows to go either to the beginning of the region or to the end of the region.
Yeah.
How do you get around in Logic? What are some basic things
I know
you do?
Maybe it sounds strange, but for me, I'm so big on using the zoom tools, and like I'll flip to the magnifying glass in a second and just grab that, like magnify that one little area, and then I'll pop back out. But it's one of those things where I've been doing it for like 15 years.
That's great.
And I'm really quick at it.
You're the one I want to learn from.
But there's probably more efficient ways, but I'm quick at these. And it's one of those things now where I always feel like, oh man, like I'm just going to take some time and start working that one into my muscle memory. But it really is just muscle reflex. It's like I'm so quick to go the other way and I do it without thinking that I get frustrated. Some things you can pick up, but you have to start practicing it. You have to work it in. And if I'm in a rush and I'm like wanting to just focus on the actual creative work, I don't want to be distracted by, oh yeah, I'm learning these new hotkeys now.
Right, totally. Do you,
know?
Is there a key on the keyboard that zooms out or in, or do you have to reach up with the mouse and grab the little zoom slider?
So
How does that
I'm
work?
big on, I have the, what is it? The very top left. I have the full max size keyboard. I'm still big on that. The escape key, I hit that and it gives me the drop down of all the tools of my cursor tools. And then I just literally like grab the zoom.
Okay.
It's funny because in Pro Tools, I use the hotkeys.
But that's for
the
zooming
zoom
in, right? What if you need to zoom back out?
Yeah, I just use the zoom sliders.
The slider?
I don't know. I'm quick at that for some reason.
Okay, cool. Good. Well, there you go. That's all that matters to me is like, if you can be quick, then it's good enough, you know?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be anything other than whatever it is.
I guess so.
I like to work pretty fast if I can. Once I'm in, like when you're in the moment, when you're feeling creative and you're trying to just get your ideas down, the last thing you want, right, is the computer to feel like it's in your way.
That's the thing, you know? I mean, I feel like I get so focused on wanting to just focus on the song or the part or whatever. And I don't want to start having to learn something new at that moment.
All right. So here's another question. In Michelle Treacy Colors, I also noticed that it almost had like a kind of a distortion to the sound. It's like, and I've heard this before in productions where it's not distorted, but if you notice it, it's like a harmonic distortion quality that makes it feel like it's turned up louder, you know? And I wonder if that was an intentional thing. It's, you know, that it helps make the chorus feel powerful. Can you just talk at all, whether you remember that specifically, can you talk about the power of using distortion creatively in production?
Well, I mean, I think it adds harmonics sometimes if it's the right kind of distortion. I mean, I'm always trying to add, especially on like bass parts and drum parts. And my favorite thing right now is using like the thermionic culture vulture from U Audio. And
I haven't used that yet, but I keep hearing about it.
It's my favorite. It's like my go-to, and I'm always, and it takes up so many resources. So I'm like always having to print it down right away. But I just love it because it just gives it so much more attitude. It's like the roar, you know, and it just kind of jumps out. Even if you thought the part was cool to begin with, I find I throw that or like the Manny Marroquin distortion and using any of those kinds of things, and it just gives it attitude, you know. It's the fuck yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right, that's what it is. And so for me, it's sort of the equivalent of, you know, I remember when I started out, we record, we put things on a cassette and go listen to it in the car. And then we turn up my friend's car stereo all the way. It was distorted as hell.
Yeah.
But that's what felt like our music was rocking to us.
Absolutely.
And I've heard that in the digital culture brought forward as part of making mixes work really well in the computer and in the box, is sort of duplicating what used to just kind of happen naturally in the world. I feel like some, you know, part of it is like people almost like figured out how to take, well, if the speaker sounded distorted, let's just make the whole mix sound distorted. Now it's playing back on systems that the speakers aren't distorting, but it gives you that same sense of like, this is cranked up. This is fuck yeah, you know?
It's exciting. And it adds all these harmonics to it that are influencing your ear and you don't even realize it, you know?
All right, so here we go. More slamming, kick and bass stuff. Alee, It Won't Be Christmas.
Yes.
It's a Christmas song, and the YouTube video's got little Christmas ornaments on it and everything. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's this slamming, kick and bass, in your face sound. How do we get that? What do we do if we want to do a track like that?
Well, geez, I'm trying to remember what I did on that one. That one I did mix too.
Do we just turn them up loud?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, you know, making sure that there aren't things competing in that range. Like having the bass and the kick drum live in frequency ranges that are complementary is important. I feel like that's still something that I'm always like hoping I'm doing right. You know, and it's like, okay, if it feels good, then it's probably good, you know?
Right. All right. Don't overanalyze it.
That too. I mean, there was even a recent track that I did on this new Alee record, and I went back and forth with where to have the bass live because I liked it in a couple different places. And I tried a couple ways of mixing it because I wanted the kick I wanted it to just really drive it. But I also had chosen a kick sound that it's like I'm my own worst enemy because I love kick sounds that are warm And this one sounded a little more lo-fi in that it didn't have like a really bright top end. But then I also love lots of bass,
Right.
like the bass instrument. And this track was so heavy with the bass. So I was like trying to get them to live together and get the best of all worlds, and testing it out in my car. And then I tested it out at Addiction down the street. And I was like, well, in this one version, the bass sounds tighter, but I'm missing the feeling that in my gut, like
Right.
I'm missing the feeling that I'm getting from the other one, where it's not that it was so loose and flabby that it wasn't working, but it just didn't have the same kind of effect. And I ended up going with the one that was giving me that feeling, because again, there was the fuck yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
If samples were live musicians, you kept picking your friends to be in the band, is what you're saying.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I'll spend like an hour and a half going through tambourine samples the other day just to find the right one. Like, and then I spent another half an hour on it yesterday.
Do you ever feel like, fuck this, man, I'm just picking up a tambourine, I'm just going to play it?
Sometimes, but I mean, you know, I'm very much an in the box person these days, you know, and I sometimes feel like that's quicker, and I have such a wider range. The world is my oyster,
Right,
with samples, you know.
Do you just have massive hard drives now full of sample libraries? Is that a thing?
I call my sample drive the tickle trunk.
The tickle trunk.
Yeah. Well,
on the holodeck.
It's a throwback to an old, I guess, oh geez, that's the Canadian in me. It's like this Canadian television show for children called Mr. Dress Up. And he had this tickle trunk, which was like, looks like a pirate's chest of costumes.
Wow, the tickle trunk.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah, having a lot of samples. And there's also this really great website that your listeners, if they're not using it, they should definitely check it out.
You can call them the rock stars.
The rock stars. Yes. The rock stars should check out, called Splice.
Oh yeah, right. I know about Splice. I haven't begun to use it yet.
Yeah.
Tell us about
awesome.
Splice.
It's just great because, I mean, before Splice, you know, you always, samples are released in big sample packs, and you don't know what you're getting. Like you're paying for a sample pack of samples. It may be 300 samples and you like 2 kick drums for whatever it is that you specifically need them for. So with Splice, you pay a monthly fee and you get a certain number of samples per month, and you can just pick and choose. It's just a la carte.
Very cool. So it's kind of like the stock images. It's kind of like,
yeah, exactly.
You know, all these membership sites where you need to download bits and pieces of things.
Yeah.
So you just go through and it's sort of like a massive library of samples. And when you find the one that's going to work for you, you can use it.
Yes.
Do you have a way to audition it before into your production while you're working somehow?
Not per se. No, they have like a browser on their website, and they also have like a toolbar, a top toolbar for Mac, where it like drops down when you from your top toolbar, and you can see the samples you downloaded. But like I'll just put up if I'm specifically trying to find something that sounds right in my production, I'll have Logic running, I'll have the song looping, and I'll just sit there with Splice, and I'll just be playing through the different
Straight from the internet,
just
that's
like
pretty
auditioning stuff and hearing.
Can you
it
MIDI control
in
to their platform yet?
No.
All right, so hold up.
Actually, if they
need to adopt MIDI control, so my keyboard will play the sample in real time.
Yeah.
They need to let me upload my instrumental track so that I can just like program some of their stuff into it using their website, or they need to have a plugin in my Pro Tools so that I can sample those and audition them in real time in my session. I'm talking to you, Splice.
Yeah.
There you go. You heard it first on Recording Studio Rockstars.
Definitely. There is a feature of their website that I haven't used very much. So there might be something like that, because you can upload sessions, and there is some sort of a shared.
Yeah, maybe there is.
I know there's some element of collaboration as well, but I don't know how far that goes. I don't know if that means you can also audition some sounds in it. I talking out of my.
Also, there was a lot of should-haves from somebody who's never even used Splice before, sitting across the room from somebody who's using it regularly and making great pop productions.
Well, I'm using one aspect of it for sure. But
well, that's a cool feature, though. I dig that. All right.
It is, yeah.
Let's see. Let's keep moving along from there and talk. Well, let's talk about, maybe that was the answer to this next question.
Okay.
But when you do need to buy libraries of sounds and have samples, talk about some basic advice you have for people, like where should you put your samples? How should you organize them? What's a great way to know how to access them. I can't even say it. Know how to access your samples in the moment when you need them in your productions and not have it kind of mess up your world. What are some good tips for people about that?
Well, something I do is, obviously I have like a 3, right now I think the one I'm using is like a 3 terabyte drive full of stuff. And I use an app called Audio Finder by Iced Audio. And it's like a sample databasing software, basically. So, if you were to get a library of 300 sounds, you could get it to scan that folder. And then you can add your own metadata. You can pick your favorites. You can rate them with a star rating. So in Audio Finder, from time to time, I'll go through libraries that I have on my hard drive, and I'll make playlists in the left-hand column of Audio Finder. And it'll be like pop kicks, or it'll be, hi-hats, or it'll be like starter drum loops for writing sessions, or things that I like. I've got one playlist called All the Magic, and it's just like weird shit that I've just run across on my hard drive. And I'm like, that's weird, but it might be really cool for something. And then I have these playlists of some of my favorites, my handpicked favorites of sounds, that when I'm in the moment and I'm looking for a kick drum, that's where I start. I go to that playlist and I know I've already vetted those sounds, and hopefully there's something on there that's right for that particular song.
So you're not necessarily making a whole new ton of work for yourself, like where you have to go through and like write a paragraph about each sample when it comes in, but you're probably just able to, like, when you hear something cool, you're like, ooh, just drag it and drop it in these little folders or something
Exactly.
like that.
Just drag it. It's like having playlists in iTunes, really, where, the song is still, or the sample is still living in the same spot on your hard drive. And that's the cool thing about Audio Finder is you can keep the file hierarchy of all your different libraries, so you know what library it came from. You could have samples across various, like multiple hard drives. Audio Finder can look at all of it and represent it all in your window, and you can have playlists that are referencing samples from all sorts of different places.
Is it troublesome if you decide to move a folder later, or does it sort of...
It'll tell you that you can't find the sample. Yeah. I don't move my folders that much for that reason.
So that's why you got a big 3 terabyte drive. And then you said you wanted to talk about backup. Does that include your sample library?
Yes. Yeah. I have like a couple methods of backup. I back up to another hard drive that's here, but I also have gotten into using Backblaze for online backups. And it's just constantly looking at my drives and keeping everything synced. It's not like a long-term archival kind of thing. It's more like, this is what your system looks like right now, And so I know that if something goes down, I've got that.
Would Backblaze rescue your startup drive as well as far as OS?
No, it does not. So I use Time Machine for my startup drive.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then I'm using Time Machine as well. So Rockstar's Time Machine is the built-in Apple backup software. And I have the startup drive, but then I also have an additional Time Machine drive over here. However, if I lost my startup drive, I'd have to put in a fresh one, format it, and then, recover from the Time Machine. Is that the way it's working for you too? Or is there more of an instant? I know people talk about using Carbon Copy Cloner as a way to have like an instantaneous startup recovery. Like
I use that as well. I use that for my, I use Carbon Copy Cloner for my sessions backup, like for my local backups. So I have another external drive that every day when I'm done work for the day, I go back up sessions and it backs it up to the other drive. So I have 2 physical copies here. And then I know that in behind everything, Backblaze is also making a copy.
Yeah.
But
so Backblaze, the cool thing about Backblaze is it's off-site.
Yeah.
If something terrible was to happen to the location, the studio, your sessions from recently anyway would still be safe.
That's right.
Online.
That's right.
Cool. All right. Well, let's keep jumping forward. We're moving right along. I got lots of questions. This is really fun too. So, reference tracks. Talk about having tracks that, always remind you of what it means to have a great pop production. Do you have stuff you like to go listen to? Like, do you go listen to Bruno Mars or something like that? And you're like, that's what the low end's supposed to sound like, or Pharrell, or whoever your favorites are.
Mike, they're always changing. And because I jump back and forth between the pop and country worlds, it changes even more. One of my favorites right now is is from the last Weekend record, I Feel It Coming. I love how that track sounds. I love where the bass is so big, or so loud, but the kick drum's still really punchy, and I love where everything's sitting in that mix. That's been a recent reference for me. Also, like Haim's new record, I really like the way that sounds. But I'll load up a lot of different things, It just depends. I use actually a plugin that your rock stars might like called Magic AB.
Oh yeah, right. Yep.
And it's so useful for just having, up to 9 different reference tracks at a moment's notice. You can just flip between them and hear what your mix is sounding like compared to those references.
That's very cool. I recently started using one called Reference that comes from masteringthemix.com. I hope I'm saying the website right. But same thing. And the ability to audition reference tracks so quickly is so key, because it used to be that it would get really complicated. You'd be like, oh, okay, well, let's see. I'm going to have some extra tracks in the bottom of my session that are all muted, and I'll go down and I'll unmute one, and I'll try and mute everything and listen and
match
things up. And it was such a pain in the ass that I just never do it,
Yeah.
Or you're like, well, I've got these CDs, and you'll switch to the CD player, and you're like, but I don't know if that really sounds the same as Pro Tools or whatever.
No, the great thing about the Magic AB plugin is that you can have it last on your stereo channel, so that none of your, if you've got anything going on your 2-bus, none of it's being affected. You're just listening to those references straight out of Logic.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so are there any other levels of referencing? Have you ever, for example, pulled a reference track into the session to see what the waveforms look like? Or have you ever tried to analyze the groove in a track by lining up your own samples to what's going on, what you visually see on a reference?
Done both. I mean, I feel like the lining it up, lining up rhythmically, yes, definitely done that when I wanted to try to capture a certain groove. I think it was with Toto's Africa.
Nice.
Just sounded so good. Yeah, that was within the last year, I definitely did that. In terms of analyzing a mix that way or frequency-wise, I feel like it's less relevant because the track is going to be mastered. You're not getting a real proper comparison.
Right.
So
right. The waveform's
going
to look much bigger on a finished master than where you're at with the mix.
Yeah. It's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah. What about that question of sending a reference of your mix to the artist or the label to give a listen to? We're not at the mastering stage yet, but do you send them a quiet mix?
No.
Talk about that. Tell us what it means to not send off a quiet mix to your artist or client.
Yeah. I mean, these days, that I don't think that works. You can explain all you want that this is the mix that's going to go to the mastering engineer and they're going to make it loud. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's just a more common thing. And what I always do is I do what I call a fake master, and I throw on a couple extra things on my 2-bus that just brings up the level so that when they press play, it's sort of a facsimile of what it might be like mastered. And it just brings up the level. It jumps out of their speakers. They're able to, it just gives them context, What
are some tools that you like to use to do fake mastering with?
Usually it's pretty simple, actually. The last couple things I put on my 2-bus are the Slate FGX. I like how it brings up the level. You got to be careful with it because it can get a little crunchy.
I like having the sort of the low end and high end boost. I don't remember what they call it. Transient and then detail.
Yes. I'm
like, is this detail? Is
pretty
this
cool.
High end? And then also there's the hard, soft.
Yes. Well, that I find that's where it can get crunchy if you're not careful. I find if I just pull it all the way down, that's usually the best because I always have a lot of bass in my stuff. So it can really start to fuzz out. I only ever use that middle module too. I don't even really use the compressor on that because I'm doing things on my 2-bus already that it's already, I feel like, sounding mostly where it should be. It's just mainly bringing it up to that level. And then I'll often put an L2 after that just because I know the L2 and it's set to 0. It's just to make sure that there's no little peaks that just jump over, but it's not doing anything. It's not.
I was doing mixes recently and I had the opportunity to simply say, well, I wonder which one of these I want to use. And I'd put a different instance of every Make It Loud plugin on in there. And then I just, very quickly, I kind of sort of level matched them, but then I flipped them on and off, and I was like, wow, and I ended up using FGX for that one.
Oh, nice.
And a lot of other ones that I would have thought I would have loved, I didn't use.
Yeah.
But it's not a which one is the best one thing necessarily, but it is definitely remarkable how different they all sound.
Yeah.
They're like totally different tools.
Yeah, definitely.
So very cool. All right. So here's another question. How about what you're curious about in pop production? What do you aspire to create right now?
Wow, that's a good question.
What's turning you on? Like right now, this week?
What's turning me on?
Yeah.
I've actually been listening to a lot of country music this week. I've been working with some country artists.
And that kind of goes to my next question too, which is Madeline Merlo, Pink Flamingo. It's a great party country track. And talk about what you like about producing country, the transition from pop into country. How do you bring one into the other? What do you have to let go of?
Well, it's always changing. It's a mark that's constantly changing. And for me, like I would never, because I've got such a pop background, but then I also have like the organic instrument singer-songwriter background, I feel like my compass ends up living somewhere in the middle of the pop and country. I don't know. I feel like these days, some of the country artists I'm working with, the more pop I make it, the more happy they are. So it's really like, what is the artist comfortable with? What is their team comfortable with? And also I've found like, because right now I'm sort of living in this place musically, career-wise, where I'm working with Canadian country artists who are going to radio with the stuff that we're doing. And then I'm also I'm starting to work with American country artists. And it's interesting seeing how in the different countries, because they're dealing with different radio climates. Literally
different climates too.
Yeah.
Canadian country's a lot colder up there.
That's very true.
You're riding horses with, heavy woolen jackets on up there.
Oh yeah. 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 It's interesting. I'm trying to figure out like how to say this, but I feel like Canadian country artists don't go as pop as some of the American country artists are going right now.
The thought popping into my head, which you can tell me I'm right or just correct me, is I bet Canadian country is more Americana than American country. Would you say that there's anything to that at all? Or is that?
I mean, when I think of Americana, I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that there is still sort of a more traditional country sound to some of it. But I think it's also honestly just due to the nature of the kind of promotional machines that you have down here, where you have like a Sam Hunt or Keith Urban, and these are massive artists, and you have the ability to promote it in a way that can be the next big thing. It's going to be everywhere.
Right.
And it's pop. It's really pop, or he's rapping over it or whatever. I feel like in Canada, you're just dealing with a smaller population, a smaller marketing budget from the labels there. And so they may not be able to influence the scene the way that, your Sam Hunts and your Keith Urbans can.
Right. So does that translate into meaning that the country that's being put out in Canada needs to remain a little more country? Well, because it's more of like tapping into that particular niche of music.
I definitely feel like I've gotten the message from some of the labels and some of the artists that they get pushback from radio stations sometimes if they're too pop or if they're too this or too that. Because at the end of the day, if they're going to radio with a single, they're wanting the radio stations to be all over it, and they definitely get a good response from some of the more country sounding stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, so we're about to take a break and we'll come in for the jam session. I'm actually going to ask a few more questions that come from the rock stars themselves when we go into the jam sessions. But before we do, let me ask you this last closing question about Pink Flamingo. Talk about what makes that such a great party track, or what makes the chorus kind of come together in that one.
Well, I mean, it's got a great groove and the lyrics are super fun. I mean, it kind of sounds like you're at a party with your friends. There's lots of background vocals, there's a lot of hooks like the wake up, stay cool, where it just sounds like you want to kind of hang out with these people.
Right.
I don't think it's one thing per se. I think it's like the songwriters did a great job writing it, and the track itself, we went for that kind of a party vibe, tried to hype up those moments, tried to really highlight the fun fact. And Madeline, I mean, she loves the song. She has such a fun time performing it. So in the end, it comes down to her. She gave a great performance.
Yeah. Would you describe a chorus in a song like that or production like that as there's just more in the chorus too? There's like more instruments, more voices, more width, more frequency?
I think it helps that there are a lot of vocals, that it sounds like it gives the impression of a crowd of people in some moments.
Wait a minute. Does the term chorus possibly come from that?
Yeah, I guess so. I never really thought about it that way per se, but you want your chorus to like slam.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Well, Rockstars, we're going to take a break. Karen, thank you for being here with us. We will include links to all the stuff we're talking about in the show notes, including links to a number of Karen's productions. Fantastic stuff, and I suggest you go check it out. Just click through. If you're on your iPhone or your Android, you should be able to click right through there. Sean may even include the YouTube links themselves in the show notes so that you can click right through on your phone and listen to this great music right away. And we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Roswell Pro Audio brings you microphone design that is out of this world. Endorsed by a growing list of artists and producers like Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Ross Hogarth, who's recorded Van Halen, Ziggy Marley and the Doobie Brothers, and Super Dupes, working with Drake, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. These are all rock stars that have discovered just how great Roswell microphones sound. Check out the Mini K47, which uses a capsule modeled on the one in the vintage U47 at a street price of only $299, or the beautiful Delphos condenser microphone with a capsule tuned like the vintage U67 with great clarity and far lower noise at a street price of only $899. In fact, you are hearing my voice right now on the beautiful Delphos microphone. These mics are carefully crafted by hand and immediately feel good even before you plug them in and hear how great they sound. These are well-built microphones that will last you and your studio a lifetime of great recording. Check out more audio examples of these awesome mics at roswellproaudio.com. Are you thinking about hiring professional mastering for your song or record? Chris Graham is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer who has mastered thousands of songs for both pro and home studio clients just like you. Send in your song and Chris will give you a free sample master of your mix. Book a project with Chris today and also get a free video mix consultation before mastering. This will help make sure your mixes are the best that they can be. So go to chrisgrahammastering.com today and get your free sample started and your record finally finished. Just click the link included in the show notes. Hey Rockstars, Lid Shaw, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Karen Kosowski, and we've been talking about producing pop music, country music, using Logic, and making sure your rhythm section sounds freaking awesome.
Yes, definitely.
And your choruses. We've got a few more questions before we jump into the usual jam session, and some of these questions come from the rock stars themselves, so I thought I would ask them. These actually come from our internal survey where I ask you guys, rock stars and girls, to share questions that you'd like me to ask on the podcast, so I'm going to do that today. So one of them is simply this: what's one of your favorite parts about the recording studio and producing music?
I'd say my favorite part is when you start to feel that magic and you start to lose all sense of time and you don't notice your own bodily functions of being hungry or whatever, and you're in that moment, things are gelling. And for me, it's often at a different point every single time. It could be you're tracking a really great vocal take and the song starts to come to life, or it could be I found a really cool sample and it's like opening up all the possibilities in my imagination of where this is going to go, and it gets exciting.
Yeah. I remember that on one of my first sessions, I was working with this band, I think some of which were my friends. I think I'd met them through the producer who owned the studio, and I was the young guy who had my first shot of a full day in the studio.
Wow.
And it was we started in the morning and it wasn't till 9, 10, 11 at night or whatever, I finally realized I hadn't eaten anything, one hamburger or something finally for dinner. And I remember noticing that. I was like, wow, that's I didn't even notice that the time went by.
Yeah.
And that is a good feeling. I can't do that every day or else I start feeling crappy, but occasionally it's nice. And it's cool when it transitions it could be the mix, could be the writing, could be the,
Yeah.
some other aspect of it.
It's always a little different, I think that's one thing I like about doing this every day as well, is that I get bored with routine. In some ways I'm a creature of habit and I like routines, but it gets boring after a while. And it's like, it's really never the same.
What's your astrological sign?
I'm a Taurus.
A Taurus.
Yes.
Right. Don't bore us, Taurus. Get to the chorus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, if it was the same every day, if every session went the same, you'd be doing something wrong. Like, it should be different every time. You should be trying to do something new. You should be, start trying different sounds you've never tried. And maybe it means that you're having to figure out some new way of doing it. But I think you're on the right track if you do that.
So I'm a Virgo, and I don't know if it's why, but I definitely love routines.
Oh, okay.
However, at the same time, I also really love when those sessions come around where you blow off the routine and the times where my best friends come down for a weekend and we go into the studio and it's 3 a.m. and I'm like, give me another piano track. I don't even know how to play this thing,
Totally. Do you find that the rest of your life becomes, you sort of have the ways that you do those things and that allows the lack of routine in the rest?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I don't really know if this is the right answer, but I think that the routine in my life and the hard work and the getting the job done factor allows me to really embrace the celebration afterwards or whatever. So maybe that's kind of my answer to it. So like, if the routine is getting the work done and finishing, then the fun part where it's like I can throw the routine out the window feels way more fun at that point.
Yeah, totally.
And if I try and enjoy the celebration before I got the work done, I just feel stressed about it.
Yeah, it's not a responsible move.
All right, so here's one. This one comes in from Ross Senna, if I'm pronouncing your name right, Ross. It says, "Hey, Lidge, is there any benefit to working in a home studio compared to a real production studio?" So, Karen, I'm turning that question over to you. I know you've worked in a lot of home studios, and you can talk about what you call this studio right here. And there's certainly elements that are...
Yeah, I mean, honestly, depends. I think that a real production studio, and I'm doing air quotes here, I mean, if you mean like a large tracking studio, obviously what I said before, which is, you're paying by the hour, there's definitely, it depends on what you're going in to do. If you're going in and you have a clear idea of what you're wanting to achieve, then that can be amazing. It can be an awesome thing. These days, there aren't a lot of budgets that allow for going in and just being creative for as long as you need to in a studio where you're paying by the hour.
And in a way, kind of thank God, because I kind of got sick of working with bands in the studio that were writing on that kind of dime,
Right, yeah.
Let's go spend $500,000 to just not have any idea what we're really going to do for this record yet.
Yeah, I mean, for most artists, those days are gone. You know, those budgets don't exist. And so I think that when you said the exact phrase real production studio, I thought, well, this is as valid these days in terms of the creation of music and the writing of music. I think there's a lot of benefits to at least starting out your production this way. I always want to. In terms of also having a space that's in your living space, there are pros and cons of that, definitely I do love the convenience factor, but there's also the times when I've had a writing and production room that wasn't connected to my living space. There was also the nice fact of the matter that once I was gone for the day and come home, I actually had a little bit of division between work and life, which, only worked for a few years. It's hard.
That's true. And if there's a difference between, if home studio versus real production studio means the level of quality of equipment and gear, I think that would still apply. Like if I was sort of in a homey environment with less fancy equipment, I think the benefit would be I feel relaxed, it's comfortable. I don't feel as precious about whatever is about to happen versus being in an environment with nicer gear, but maybe it doesn't feel as welcoming.
Yeah, or it's just a little more stressful because of the overhead factor and it depends on what stage you're at in
Right.
the project and what you're looking to achieve.
And then it seems like the flip side is the nice thing about going into a quote real production studio is like, hey, we're actually here to do some real work today, where it's like, let's get focused. Let's do what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Let's go till, we're done and let's finish it by then instead of just like, sitting around talking about doing it.
That's totally valid. That can be a very valid factor for some people where you need that. If you have trouble focusing in your home space, then it's probably not a good idea to be trying to work out of it.
All right, so now here's another one. This one comes from Barrington 1954. Could you explain compression in a way so a 5-year-old could understand, e.g. the knee, the threshold, the ratio, etc.? I feel like on the one hand, you might go, I don't know if I can explain it. On the other hand, I've heard your production and your mixes. I think you can explain what it takes to make stuff sound awesome like you're making it sound.
For a 5-year-old.
Okay, yeah.
I mean,
no,
really,
I think he meant 5 years of production as an adult. I don't know.
I mean, the easiest way to describe compression is that it brings up all the quiet things up to a level.
Which is the big upside downness of what compression really is, right?
Yeah.
Because compression is compressing things.
Yeah.
Which sounds like making it quieter. And that's actually what it does. But by making it quieter, it actually allows you to bring everything up, which makes all the quiet stuff louder, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your answer.
No, I mean, I feel like that is the simplest way to look at it. And then limiting is just knocking down the loudest moments.
Yeah. How about this? What sort of instruments might you first reach for a compressor, and what sort of instruments might you first reach for a limiter?
Well,
is that even a thing?
I always track through a little bit of compression when I'm doing vocals, most times with bass. Guitars, not so much. Guitars, I often like to record them without compression and then add that after the fact. Because it's always better to have something that's less compressed, and then you can decide later. You don't want to be stuck with something. Yeah, I guess bass and vocals.
Okay. And then the other parts of the question were the knee, the threshold, the ratio. How do you want to reply to those? So
the threshold is the point at which it kicks in, which your compression kicks in. If it's high, the louder signals aren't affecting it. As soon as you start pulling it down, you start seeing the compressor moving, that you've reached a point in the threshold where the sounds are going over the threshold and triggering the compressor.
And by compressor moving, we're talking about if there's a needle on it and it says GR for gain reduction, that needle was starting to move, meaning it's compressing.
You're getting a certain number of decibels of compression.
Yeah, or some plugins, for example, just have a meter, like it's usually the level coming down from the top down.
Yeah.
And that indicates compression is happening as well.
Yeah, which is also affected by the ratio, because the ratio is how many times it's being compressed compared to the original signal. So 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1, when you start getting into higher amounts like 20-to-1, it's like, that's more like limiting, where it's knocking it down so far.
Yeah. And those numbers essentially mean 1-to-1 means that one level of input is going to put one level of output out, and it means there's no compression happening.
No compression. Yeah.
And 20-to-1 means if you go in 20 times louder, it's only going to come out 1 times louder.
That's a great way to say it.
So it's really super compressed, right?
Yeah. And the knee is kind of affects like how transparent that compression is, whether it happens smoothly or whether it happens really aggressively. So that's probably the simplest way to say that.
Yeah. The knee is like that point at which when the sound crosses the threshold. I think a knee means that initially it's sort of like a soft compression, and as it goes up a little bit more, it gets harder and harder or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like a rounded. If you looked at the graph, the line goes up, and then you hit the threshold and the line goes towards the right some. Yeah. And the knee is like that bend right there.
The knee is the kind of thing for me, like it's just, I'm never thinking about it technically. I'm just listening. I'm just trusting my ears. I'm like, okay, yeah, I like it there.
Yeah. And knee is usually like soft or hard. I guess it's variable on some plug-in compressors and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with you. I just move it around a little bit, or I just say just put it somewhere and forget about it quickly.
And some don't have a knee.
Yeah, some don't have a knee. Sometimes my right knee hurts. All right, so let's jump to this next one. This one comes from Michael Fraley, and he says, when recording a vocal, do you try to get one perfect take, or do you record 3 or 4 and combine the parts you like?
Oh, yeah. No, it's definitely like recording a lot of vocals. I mean, I'll record, it depends on the singer. It depends on the kind of song.
Let's talk about the pop stuff, because the pop stuff is like, there is nothing that sounds like it was anything other than exactly what you guys meant for it to be.
Yes. Pop stuff, generally you track tons of vocals for it, like upwards of 20, 30 sometimes for different parts. But when I'm doing that, I'm also thinking about getting doubles and triples and quadruples out of it. You know, I'm tracking the vocalist singing that pre-chorus that many times so that I can not only have the uber take, which is, you know, I comp between all those takes and find just the best parts, but then I'm going to also have enough material there to make doubles and double up the vocal and triple it as I need to. Pop vocals, you record a lot, you know, especially for the really shiny pop productions where, you know, it's very thickened, it's very treated, very comped.
And is recording a lot of vocals also required just kind of for that lead track, because each line has to be delivered in just the right kind of way?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you definitely have a vision for how you want something to come across. It depends on the singer too. You know, sometimes you're trying stuff out and you do a lot of takes because you're exploring some of those possibilities and trying to find just the right way to say it. And then again, having all that extra material can also be helpful for other parts in the song, because another thing about pop production is you end up needing a lot of different scraps of vocal that might be little ear candy moments in different other parts of the song. And this is the ear candy moments, finger motions I'm making.
Right.
It's kind of like the Wayne's World.
She's doing like a Indian belly dance over there or something.
Yeah. I mean, having more material to work with for pop productions is always better.
All right. So here's a question that is real world for me. When I'm leaping around, if I'm recording bits and pieces and let's focus on getting this thing right and let's layer it, let's put some doubles in there. Great. Okay, let's go to this. What are some ways that help you keep track of making sure that you're getting everything you need? Do you sometimes get lost and it's like, oh crap, we totally didn't get the third chorus or whatever it is? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I found it helpful to always have a lyric sheet in front of you, and I'll make notes on that. I've gone through periods where I'll actually make a chart. I've gone through periods where I have like an Excel spreadsheet and I put every line of the lyric on a different line of the chart, and then I've got all the takes, you know, little squares for each take.
And you're making mental notes about which take was pretty good?
I'll make check marks or whatever.
Yeah.
I tend, honestly, like I've tried that, using that in real life situations, and I find that I usually abandon a lot of my note taking partway through because you just get into it and then you're like kind of wrapped up in the moment. But I do also find those kind of methods can be useful afterwards when I'm going through all the takes that we did, right, and I'm comping them and I'm making sure that I know what's happening on every take.
I am with you. So I try to stay on top of it, but I also often find when I'm recording vocals that I do abandon things, like maybe even abandon the lyric sheets or abandon taking notes, and I'm just in it and listening and doing lots of takes. And there's like, my gut tells me when we've got enough, plus the sound of the singer's voice and the fact that they just can't sing anymore will also tell you that you got enough, you know?
There is that. Yeah. There's only so much they can sing. So
is it common to do multiple vocal sessions for a pop song? Where you like come back and you've comped it and you worked it, but you come back now to sing again and it improves? So
the way I tend to work is that I might have the artist in at the beginning to do a scratch vocal. And that's usually the vocal that maybe isn't perfect. And I'll do a few takes to get that scratch vocal, and I'll even comp it, and sometimes I'll even tune it and time it to give myself something to work around from a production standpoint. And I might do background vocals at that point too, just to fill in the blanks of like, okay, well, we definitely want this kind of background vocal here. And then I have like a template to build parts around and to have players track to if that's applicable. And then I'll bring the artist back in to sing, quote, the final vocals. But it's also happened where many times where the scratch vocal, we captured some sort of magic that day that even though the artist is singing great when they come in to sing the final vocal, there's just some kind of, magic that we captured that you can't recreate. So
you can never get that back for some reason.
No. So I always try to make sure that when doing scratch vocals that I'm still recording through the chain that I want. And I've, shot out some mics with the artist and, we're liking how it's sounding from a technical standpoint. I'm liking how it's sounding from a technical standpoint. And I know it's something that I could potentially use in the master because sometimes the artist is more relaxed that day because they're not thinking about it as being the final vocal.
Yeah.
And they're just having fun. And they're just enjoying. And sometimes there's something to the fact that they're not singing to a full production. Some artists get really inspired singing to the whole final sounding band and the production and everything's there. But sometimes the performance that comes out when they're just singing to a very stripped down track in the beginning ends up having a certain quality to it that you can't recreate now once everything else is pounding away around you, All
right, cool. So great answers to all these. Let's jump now into the traditional jam session.
Cool.
So when you started out in recording, what was holding you back?
Not collaborating enough, not reaching out to people. Because I came from a very do-it-yourself thing, I think I probably could have learned faster or learned some shortcuts from people if I had collaborated more.
You were doing your own production. You were also touring on your own and everything.
Yeah.
And you said it wasn't until later that you started co-writing with people.
Yeah.
What was your first experience of collaboration like? Do you remember it being real positive or kind of awkward?
Definitely, it was a new thing. I can't remember specifically what my first co-writing sessions would have been like, but...
Do you remember what some of your first feelings were around co-writing? Like, was there stuff that you were like... that you felt nervous about? Was it like harder to just be honest and try out a lyric idea or something like that?
Yeah.
Or you're what if they think that's stupid?
Yeah. And you still have those thoughts now.
Right.
I mean, that never completely goes away, but definitely it can be nerve-wracking when you're going into a situation and especially when you're newer to co-writing. I think one of the things that I learned over time was to feel like you accept other ideas from other people and that it's very much a team effort and co-writing will go better if it's like improv comedy. Like if you see some actors on a stage and they're improvising, one of the first rules is accept the premise.
Right.
So if you're constantly shutting down your co-writers' ideas, you're not going to get very far and you might as well write the song by yourself.
Yeah.
So if someone says something, try to run with it for a bit. Even if you're not entirely sure yet, it's good to like see where that can go and follow it down and add your thing to it and add this to it. And
it's probably allowed to say, I don't know where to go with it, rather than, that's not good.
Yeah. Like, well, maybe you're just not hearing it yet,
That actually would be kind of a funny skit for a co-writing session where like somebody keeps trying to like be honest and open. They're like, that sucks, man. Don't do that. That's stupid. What did you just say? What was your
Oh,
line?
man. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about co-writing.
Good segue. That was my next question.
Oh, was it? Oh, great. Well, there you go. Was the two things: dare to be stupid and say anything. Because sometimes it's those moments where you say something that you know is not right, but it popped into your head and you say it and it triggers a thought in someone else in the room. And maybe that's the thought. Or maybe that thought that it triggers the next thought by the next person. And you don't know how you're going to get there all the time.
Yeah.
So it helps to keep kind of throwing things out, sometimes it's better than sitting quietly, everyone's staring at each other and waiting for the perfect idea to come out. It's better to just
got anything?
throw some stuff out and see what happens.
Yeah. So it's one of the things I've heard described about songwriting is the idea that you've got to open up and let all the bad songs out It's the process of letting out the bad songs that allows the good songs to come forward.
Yeah.
And I think that just applies to ideas in general. It's like when you can be in tune with your own creative process, and when an idea pops in your head, you just acknowledge it and put it out there. It doesn't matter whether it's a great idea or the right idea. It matters that you let it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the next idea follows or whatever, or somebody picks up and runs with it.
And sometimes it's like, you're in hour 3 of the session and you're all kind of looking a little space-eyed, and then you see something in your rhyming website that you're like, well, that's so silly. And you just say it, and it's dumb and it's a silly joke, but it triggers an idea in someone else that actually isn't silly. And for some reason, that's just how you got there,
And I like that you said your rhyming website. So what is a rhyming website?
There's some websites that people tend to gravitate to for finding rhymes or near rhymes when you're looking for lyrics, looking for inspiration. Just sometimes.
Can you actually say a word? Can you be like, yo, I'm sick of this shit. And then it just would go like,
you would put shit, you type in shit, and it would, yeah. I use Master Writer for my rhymes for the most part. It's actually an app. I use their older app, and it brings up lists of rhymes and near perfect rhymes, further rhymes, maybe it's not quite a rhyme, but it works. The vowel sound is similar. It's really useful when you're just looking for inspiration. Sometimes you scroll down a list of words and you're like, oh, you see something that you maybe didn't think of before.
Yeah. You know what else is coming into my head is the idea of co-writing, where one person doing that, looking inside the rhyming site and doing the near rhymes and trying this and then trying each one. It's like, in that case, maybe the other person gets to listen. And in the same way that when you're making music, you can't be zoomed in and zoomed out at the same time. And that's the benefit of working with people in the studio, is like, you could be in there clicking away at the editing and everything, but somebody else has stepped back and just absorbing it.
Right.
And they get this fresh perspective. I could see how that would work for songwriting as well,
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that was some of the best advice. That was also a pretty cool software tool. How about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something our rock stars could use on their next session today?
Okay, well, something I like to mess around with is when I've got a mix that's pretty much there, I'll send all the band instruments, everything minus vocals, to a bus, and I'll usually use like a fab filter EQ, and I'll use it to filter out various frequencies at different moments in the song. So, and sometimes it's super subtle, like not necessarily going for a really affected sound, but I might be filtering out some of the low end and some of the high end in the verse. And you don't really know it's not there until you hit the chorus and the filters go away and the chorus just is like, wow.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that tip. I feel like that's partly what I was kind of hearing in some of your productions too, when I'm like, the chorus hits and I'm like, the chorus just feels like it just opens up,
Thanks.
And there's been some other productions. God, was it a Madonna track that was done with a DJ? And it's like or maybe it was Gwen Stefani or something. And when the verse hits, it's like it just sounds like they just filter out the high end on the loop, and then it just unfilters and opens up like a traditional DJ would do with just the EQs on a turntable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because even just recently, sometimes on demos and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I think it's done. It's fine. It's a demo. I'm not like maybe going to the ends of the earth on the mix the way I would on a final master. And then I'm like, I start trying some of that in the verse. And I'm like, oh, that's so much better. And I have to do it anyways, because it's just, it changes it so much, even though it seems like such a subtle change.
Well, I like that. It's a cool tip. So taking a bunch of the instruments, sending them to a sub track, and then that sub mix of it gets filtered in a certain way. So you would kind of cut to the sub track in that moment. Yeah,
I'd automate. So that would be what you're hearing the whole time, but I'd set up automation for different sections of the song with different filters coming in, depending on what I'm trying to achieve in each section.
But it might not be filtering the drums or something like that.
It depends on what kind of effect you end up wanting.
So you can do anything you want, is what you're saying.
Do anything you want.
It's amazing. All right, so now how about a favorite hardware tool, something physical you like to have around on the sessions that just makes them better?
Honestly, like my favorite hardware tool these days is my microphone. I've been using a newer microphone that just came out. I've gotten to use it a little bit longer than that. I got to use a pre-production model and try it out, and it's amazing. It's made by a company called Townsend, and it's something that I think your rock stars probably would just go nuts over.
Tell us all about it.
So it's a microphone called the Sphere, and it's a modeling microphone. It's not the first one to come out, but I do think it's the best. It's got features that no other modeling microphone has. It basically, the general idea is a modeling microphone will interact with software in your computer to sound like a variety of vintage microphones. And you can, while you're recording or after the fact, change what kind of microphone it sounds like. So with one microphone, you can be recording a singer, but you can make it sound like you're recording them on 6 or 7 different microphones, depending on which one sounds best with their voice. So as a producer who I often travel back like around up to Canada sometimes, I was just in Calgary doing a writing session, things like that. I can travel with this one microphone, but it's like having a mic locker.
Nice.
Yeah.
And does it also sort of emulate the proximity effect of different mics and things like that?
So that's what sets this one apart, is that it has 2 capsules. So it's always recording a stereo signal, and it sees the room, and you can adjust how the proximity, how close the singer is to the mic. You can also adjust axis, and it has a cool, I'm a big fan of this mic.
That's cool. I love it. Yeah.
It has a cool feature that I've used on recording like acoustic guitars and amps, where you can turn it 180 degrees and record in stereo with the 2 mic capsules equally. And you can even adjust each to sound like a different mic. So it's like you're doing a 2 miking technique on an acoustic guitar.
Yeah, cool.
Or on an amp. And you can adjust how wide or narrow the stereo field is, how close those mics are to each other. It's pretty revolutionary. I love it. And I've been using it nonstop since I got this pre-production model.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to trying it out myself. Rockstars will include a link to the Townsend Sphere the show notes as well, so you can go check that out. Cool. And maybe we'll find some, Sean, if you find like a YouTube video of it in action, that'd be cool. Are you going to make one yourself?
If they want me to.
All right. So now let's sort of cut to the end here. You've been doing this as more than a hobby for years. What would you like to share as a resource or advice for the business side of doing this for rock stars who don't just want to do it for a hobby?
I would say collaborate as much as you can from every aspect of this business, whether it is the making of the music or whether it's the business. There's so many people that make something a success. Whether it's writing, whether it's, learning from other people production wise. It's also important to remember that it's very easy to get really focused on, as writers and producers, the feeling that we need to make a hit song. And it is true, you need to make a strong product, but without the rest of the team as well, the manager, the label, the radio tracker, the publicist, you can have a great song that doesn't get heard. So it's important to remember how many people are involved in this, and remember that at the end of the day, it's a big partnership.
What are some things that you have done to build relationships outside of the studio? I guess you moved to Nashville.
Yeah, I moved to Nashville. I mean, sometimes going to industry events can be a good way to meet people, but I feel like there's not as much value in that as there is in just word of mouth. At the end of the day, I can meet one of my heroes, one of my mixing heroes or one of my producing heroes. And if they don't know about me through my work or through someone they trust, it's only going to go so far. So I think the main thing is to do great work, and word will inevitably spread. People are going to talk about it, and people are going to introduce you to people, and you should pay back that favor and introduce people to other people. And that is really how it works. It's doing amazing work and being a good person, and hopefully the rest falls into place.
Well, it's very cool. We appreciate you taking time out to do this with us today for sure. Let's just jump right to the last question. So this one's hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. Okay. I kind of think I know what advice you're going to give yourself, but we're going to ask you anyway. You go back in time, find young Karen, who's just thinks Tori Amos is the shit. And you're going to give yourself some advice. You say, I've come to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know now to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you give yourself?
It would definitely have been to collaborate more. I didn't start doing that for over a decade. I was very insular with the way I approached things. And I think
you kept to yourself.
I did a lot. And I think that in some ways it was good because it forced me to learn things myself and come up with my own ways of doing things. But on the other hand, I think that there are people that I could have probably learned from and learned some shortcuts and better ways or more efficient ways of doing things. So
like other ways to zoom in and out on Logic.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. So just like reach out, collaborate with people. It always helps.
Awesome. Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Will you let the listeners know how they can find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, I have my own website, KarenKosowski.com. And I keep up my Instagram as much as I can and Twitter. Both my handle on both of those is @KarenKosowski.
Awesome. And Rockstars, of course, will include links to all this stuff in the show notes. So you can click through. If you're on your iPhone, Android, just click through right now on the logo and it should just pull up the show notes. You don't even have to skid off the highway in a terrible anything. You can just press the link and it'll just pull stuff up. Or wait till you pull over in a nice safe rest area and then do it. But thank you for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's awesome to hang with you. Your music is fantastic. It's been a lot of fun to talk about this stuff.
Thank
you.
I
think people will really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Cool. And thanks for being patient, Rockstars. We were talking about the failures of some technologies. My scheduling app to put this together is really remarkable when it works. And we were able to find the failures in it because we had to schedule this like 3 times before we finally got it right. Awesome. We'll see you around the studio.
See you around.
See you around Nashville. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.